Have you ever noticed how some people don't announce their comeback? When everything falls apart, when they fail, experience a humiliating setback, or just realize they hate the life they've built, they don't post a long explanation on social media. They don't try to defend their choices to their friend group. They don't tell everyone they are about to change. They simply become quieter, and months, maybe even years later, you see them again, except they aren't the same person anymore. The way they speak, the boundaries they set, their habits, and their entire personality seem fundamentally upgraded. It looks like a superpower, but it raises a very uncomfortable question. When someone disappears from everyone to rebuild their life in silence, what is actually happening behind closed doors? Were they secretly mastering their psychology and healing? Or were they simply running away because they were terrified of being seen? To understand the psychology of the silent rebuild, you have to look at what happens right before the silence begins. Usually it starts with a breaking point, an ego threat, a massive public failure, a devastating breakup, or the sudden realization that you are playing a character you don't even like. In that moment, your brain calculates a profound social risk. Evolutionary psychologists call this the social risk hypothesis. Your social standing or self-concept has been damaged, and your brain decides that any further interaction is just too emotionally expensive. You see, most of us spend our days engaging in what sociologist Irving Goffman called impression management. We are constantly performing for an audience. We try to look smart, put together, and successful for our friends, family, and co-workers. But when your life suddenly derails, maintaining that performance takes a massive amount of cognitive energy. Explaining your failure to your friends requires bandwidth. Trying to convince people that your new plan is going to work requires bandwidth. When someone suddenly stops explaining themselves, it isn't necessarily because they are bitter. They are reallocating their cognitive resources. They are taking all the psychological energy they used to spend defending their old identity and hoarding it to construct a new one. Explaining yourself is often just a covert request for permission to change. Going silent is the psychological realization that permission is no longer required. But this is where most people completely misunderstand what is actually going on. We tend to confuse solitude with loneliness, and they are not the same thing. Loneliness is a subjective, highly distressing state. It is the painful gap between the connections you want and the connections you actually have. It spikes your cortisol, keeps you hypervigilant, and leaves you emotionally exhausted. Solitude is completely different. Solitude is the state of being alone without feeling lonely. And psychologically, it acts as a very specific kind of medicine. Motivation and social psychology researcher Dr. Thuy Nguyen found that when solitude is autonomously chosen, it creates a unique deactivation effect in your nervous system. Being completely alone doesn't just calm down high arousal negative emotions like anxiety or anger. It also calms down high arousal positive emotions like excitement. It flatlines your autonomic arousal. It acts as a mandatory neurological reset button. When a burned-out executive publicly fails and retreats from their social circle, they aren't trying to punish their friends. They are desperately seeking that deactivation. They need the psychological quiet to figure out who they actually are when nobody else is watching. And that leads to one of the most surprising findings about human behavior. If you want to radically change who you are, the people who love you might actually be in your way. When you decide you don't want to be the person you used to be, you are attempting what psychologists call self-discontinuity. You are trying to put a thick psychological wall between the past version of you and the future version of you. But your social environment acts as a massive anchor to that past self. Your friends and family have an established mental model of who you are. They naturally expect you to react to the same jokes, make the same mistakes, and tolerate the same drama. It is physically and psychologically harder to change your personality in the presence of people who have known you for years. By stepping away and going silent, a person escapes those behavioral expectations. They get a clean slate. They can try on new habits, enforce new boundaries, and experiment with a new identity without their old friends saying, "Why are you acting so weird?" But what happens next is even more counterintuitive. We are constantly told by the internet that if you want to achieve something great, you should tell everyone. Announce your goals. Keep yourself accountable. Yet, the people who successfully rebuild their lives almost never do this. Why? Because your brain is incredibly easy to trick. Researcher Peter Gollwitzer investigated what happens when we make our intentions public. and he discovered a trap called a premature sense of completeness. Imagine a woman who wants to lose 50 pounds after years of struggling. She tells her friends she's starting a new rigorous routine and completely changing her lifestyle. Her friends smile, hug her, and praise her. "That's amazing, I'm so proud of you." In that exact moment, her brain registers their social validation as a reward. She feels like she has already achieved a piece of the goal simply by talking about it. And statistically, that early dopamine hit actually lowers the behavioral effort she will put in afterward. Praise kills follow-through. When your identity is tied to a goal, receiving applause for planning the goal tricks your mind into thinking you've already finished it. When you rebuild in silence, you completely bypass that trap. Because nobody knows what you are doing. Nobody is praising you. You deny yourself that premature validation. And because you aren't getting cheap dopamine from people's compliments, you are forced to get it strictly from doing the actual work. This forces a fundamental shift in how a person operates. According to self-determination theory, developed by psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, most people run on extrinsic motivation. They act to avoid guilt, or to gain status, likes, and approval from the crowd. But when you are alone in a room, and nobody is clapping for you, you have to find a different fuel source. You transition to autonomous internal motivation. You start waking up early, going to the gym, or studying a new skill, not so you can post about it, but because you made a promise to yourself. Your locus of evaluation shifts from the outside world to your own internal standards. Except there is a catch. You can lock two different people in a room alone for 6 months. One person will emerge completely transformed, highly disciplined, and emotionally detached from their past. The other person will emerge bitter, anxious, and deeply trapped in their own head. They both experience the exact same amount of silence. The psychological difference between these two people is enormous, and it comes down to what they do with their thoughts. Most people think they are self-reflecting, when they are actually just ruminating. Psychologist Susan Nolan Hoeksema found that rumination, which is passively replaying the causes and symptoms of your distress, is highly correlated with depression. It's a trap. It is your brain reopening the same wound over and over again without ever stitching it up. Organizational psychologist Dr. Tasha Urish discovered the exact mechanism that separates toxic rumination from healthy self-reflection. It comes down to one simple word shift. People who ruminate ask why. Why did this happen to me? Why am I such a failure? Why did they betray me? People who successfully rebuild ask what? What behavior led to this failure? What is my actual responsibility here? What is the very next step I need to take? When you ask why, you trap yourself in the past playing the victim. When you ask what, you force yourself to solve the problem. And this is where the transformation actually takes root. For decades, it was believed that your personality was mostly fixed by the time you reached adulthood. But recent research into volitional personality trait change proves that you can intentionally rewrite your personality through sustained, daily behaviors. It doesn't happen through a magical dramatic epiphany. It happens through identity-based habits. Behavioral scientist Wendy Wood points out that nearly half of our daily actions are completely habitual. When a person is rebuilding in silence, they aren't having cinematic breakthroughs every morning. They are engaged in the slow, unglamorous accumulation of micro-behaviors. They wake up, they read, they execute their plan. They don't check their phone for validation. Because they are doing this in private, the world doesn't see the messy, boring middle. The world only sees the polished result months later, making it look like they changed overnight. They didn't. They just stopped talking and started habituating a new identity. But there is a darker explanation we have to talk about. We have looked at why solitude is a powerful tool for growth. But silence can also be a perfectly crafted disguise. In psychology, there is a concept called experiential avoidance. It is the tendency to avoid negative internal experiences, the thoughts, memories, and emotions that cause us pain. Sometimes, a person will claim they are going silent to work on themselves. They tell themselves they are on a solitary path of discipline. But the truth is, they aren't healing. They are hiding. Imagine a student who fails out of college, or a person who faces a crushing rejection. They announce they are taking time off to focus on their growth, but they spend 12 hours a day isolating themselves, avoiding all challenges, and using self-improvement as a shield. They are terrified of vulnerability. They experienced a failure that hurt so badly, they decided to never let the world close enough to hurt them again. There is a massive psychological difference between choosing solitude because you are actively reconstructing your life, and isolating yourself because you are terrified of failing again. If you are rebuilding to eventually return to the world stronger and more engaged, that is adaptive solitude. But if you are isolating to hide from the world permanently so you never have to be judged, that is maladaptive avoidance. You see, one of the biggest myths on the internet is that trauma and adversity automatically make you stronger. They don't. Adversity itself just damages you. What creates strength is the deliberate, painful process of cognitive reframing and behavioral change that happens after the event. Rebuilding your life in silence is not about becoming antisocial. It is not an act of bitter surrender. It is a highly adaptive strategy. By severing your need for external validation and escaping the heavy expectations of who you used to be, you give yourself the psychological oxygen to breathe. You strip away the noise, you confront your own habits, and you slowly build a self-concept that doesn't shatter the moment someone disagrees with you. But even if you master this process, even if you successfully pull back, ask yourself the right questions, and completely rebuild your life in silence, there is still one major problem waiting for you. You can become incredibly disciplined, you can learn exactly how your mind works, but your own brain can quietly convince you that you are making rational choices, when you are actually just defending a new set of biases. You can become extremely good at explaining your decisions to yourself, while completely misunderstanding why you're actually making them. You can use your high intelligence to build a perfect, logical argument for why you are always right, blinding yourself to the reality of your own behavior. And that raises a much more uncomfortable question. What if your deep self-reflection and your powerful mind are the exact tools your brain is using to trap you? What if the person most capable of fooling you isn't your ex, your boss, or society, but you? Why do some people seem incredibly smart, but are actually completely fooling themselves? The video on your screen right now reveals exactly how your brain uses its own intelligence against you, and how to spot the trap before it destroys the life you just rebuilt. Click it, and I'll see you there.